Dr. Jonathan Reed was hiking with his golden retriever, Susie, enjoying a crisp autumn afternoon in the woods. Reed was a psychologist with a private practice, an educated man, not the type to invent stories about aliens. The woods were quiet, too quiet, and Susie barked and ran into the brush ahead of him. Reed heard a commotion, a low humming sound, then a yelp, the sound of an animal in pain. He grabbed a tree branch and ran toward the noise. He entered the clearing and stopped. A black triangular craft hovered silently above the ground, and beneath it stood a creature, small and gray, and it was holding what was left of his dog. The creature collapsed and lay still on the forest floor. The humming stopped. The woods went silent. It was heavy and oppressive, with a quiet that followed its violence. Reed stood over the body, breathing hard, trying to understand what he was looking at. It wasn't human. The creature was about 4 feet tall, with grayish skin and large, dark, almond-shaped eyes. The body looked biological, but also synthetic, like living tissue stretched over machinery, a suit made of flesh, or flesh made to look like suit. Reed wrapped the creature in a foil emergency blanket from his hiking pack. It was heavier than it looked, and it smelled strange. It had a chemical odor like ozone mixed with sulfur. He carried it to his car, loaded it in the bag, and drove home. He couldn't call the police. He couldn't call a hospital. He couldn't tell anyone without sounding insane. So he did the only thing that made sense. He put the alien in his chest freezer, shoved it behind the frozen vegetables, and closed the lid. The creature moved with impossible speed. It had Susie by the jaw, and in one motion, faster than Reed's eye could track, it crushed her skull. The dog didn't just die, she turned to powder. Bone and tissue reduced to dust in seconds. Reed didn't think. He swung the tree branch as hard as he could. Solid impact. The creature collapsed and lay still on the forest floor. The humming stopped. The woods went silent. It was heavy and oppressive, with a quiet that followed its violence. Reed stood over the body, breathing hard, trying to understand what he was looking at. It wasn't human. The creature was about 4 feet tall, with grayish skin and large, dark, almond-shaped eyes. The body looked biological, but also synthetic, like living tissue stretched over machinery, a suit made of flesh, or flesh made to look like suit. Reed threw up. He just killed an intelligent being, an extraterrestrial, a being that traveled across space or dimensions to end up dead in a forest clearing in Washington state, killed by a man with a tree branch. Then he realized he needed proof. He couldn't leave the body there, it would disappear, or someone would find it, or he'd come back tomorrow and convince himself that it never happened. He had to take it with him. Reed wrapped the creature in a foil emergency blanket from his hiking pack. It was heavier than it looked, and it smelled strange. It had a chemical odor like ozone mixed with sulfur. He carried it to his car, loaded it in the bag, and drove home. He couldn't call the police. He couldn't call a hospital. He couldn't tell anyone without sounding insane. So he did the only thing that made sense. He put the alien in his chest freezer, shoved it behind the frozen vegetables, and closed the lid. Reed documented everything. He photographed the creature from every angle. He recorded video footage. That footage became some of the most analyzed alien evidence in history. In the footage, the creature's eyes are open. They're moist. They reflect light. And they blink. It wasn't dead. It was healing. Reed heard it screaming from inside the freezer. But the screaming was telepathic, a sound that bypassed his ears and pierced directly into his mind. It woke him at night. It followed him during the day. A high-pitched, agonizing shriek that sounded like a dolphin in pain. He also found an object at the crash site, a black bracelet that he called the Link. When he wore it, he could sense the creature's thoughts. He could feel its rage, its fear, its desperate attempts to reach others of its kind. The bracelet connected him to the entity in ways he didn't understand and couldn't control. Within weeks, men showed up at Reed's house. They weren't wearing suits like the classic Men in Black. They wore tactical gear, military equipment. They carried weapons, the kind of hardware you don't see outside of a combat zone. They raided his home. They killed people who had seen the evidence. They burned his records, his photographs, his backup files. Reed went on the run. He said the government erased his identity, deleted his university records, his professional licenses, his birth certificate. He became a ghost, a man with no official existence, hiding from people who wanted him dead or silent.
you're going to get what you've been waiting for. An alien encounter that Dr. Jonathan Reed had about 2 years ago, and you're going to hear the entire story in a moment.
He appeared on Coast to Coast AM to tell his story. He sounded exhausted. He sounded broken, like a man who lost everything.
This is all happening in seconds.
I understand.
At that point, I ran forward, and I don't know where the logic came from. I don't know. There was no forethought. I literally struck with this bat, hitting the creature.
He played the audio of the creature screaming. Listeners heard that high-pitched trill cutting through static, the sound of the being from another world crying out from inside the freezer. The Jonathan Reed story is polarizing. Skeptics say the alien was a rubber doll, the video was a puppet, and Reed was a con man trying to sell a book. They point out that his credentials can't be verified. They note that no one has ever found the crash site or found more evidence. But the details are haunting. The violence of the encounter, the way Susie was destroyed in seconds, reduced to powder by an entity that moved faster than human reflexes could follow. The specific smell of the creature, that ozone and sulfur chemical signature, the telepathic screaming that Reed described with the desperation of a man who couldn't make it stop. And the video. If the footage is fake, it's a masterpiece. The creature breathes. Its chest rises and falls in irregular rhythm. Its eyes are moist, catching light the way living tissue catches light. When it blinks, the movement is uneven. Not the synchronized motion of a mechanical puppet, but the imperfect organic movement of real eyelids. In 1996, that kind of practical effects work would have required a professional studio. Jonathan Reed was a psychologist, not a special effects artist. He had no background in filmmaking, no access to Hollywood quality materials, no clear reason to destroy his own life or a hoax. Because his life was destroyed, Reed spent years in hiding. He lost his career, his home, his identity. He became a paranoid voice on late-night radio, playing recordings that most people dismissed as fantasy. Hoaxers usually profit from their lives. Reed never got rich, never got famous. He got erased. The freezer is what makes this story different from every other alien encounter. It grounds the cosmic horror in everyday life. We all have freezers, full of ice cream, frozen vegetables, leftovers we'll never eat. Jonathan Reed kept a healing extraterrestrial in his, wedged between the frozen peas and the ice cube trays. He slept in the next room while a being from another world repaired itself in the cold and the dark. He heard it screaming into his mind, and every morning he had to walk past that freezer to make his coffee. That's the horror of the Jonathan Reed story, the aftermath, the realization that you brought something home you can't explain, that you can't control, and can't let anyone see. The barrier between normal life and cosmic nightmare is exactly as thick as a freezer door. So next time you go hiking and your dog runs into the brush, think twice before you follow. Things in the woods don't want to be found. And remember, if you break them, you have to keep them.